Hello everyone, welcome back to PommyInOz. Hope we're all doing really well. If you are new around here, please drop a like, please drop a subscribe. It's really smashed them out recently. We're well on our way now to 2,100, so I can't thank you enough for that. If you do want to go a step further, you can become a member of the channel. You can do that. The link is in the description. You will need to click that link as well if you are on iOS. They have recently removed the join feature. Otherwise, there will be a join button just below if you have liked and subbed. So if you want to do that, we do things like sponsor Domaku, do giveaways, whatnot. It's a real nice community. And I can't thank you enough. If you are a returning PommyInOzer, g'day, how are we doing? Are you excited? We are 1-0 for the first time in well over a decade. And we've got the Doggies coming up. And this one really is the big one. And it's going to be an interesting one because obviously the Bulldogs, they went down the week just gone to a ravished Melbourne. They were really ravaged and it was a real good replay. Kind of almost very similar to the grand final that we saw where the Dogs did gain a bit of an ascendancy. They dared to come back, but in the end, Melbourne were too strong. And I think it's really interesting, this game for Carlton, because obviously, as we know, Carlton was so dominant around the clearances. This is where the Demons are a real strong side. Their two main hallmarks for the Bulldogs are their ability to cause turnover in the forward 50 and their dominance in clearances as well. And it was something that we saw Melbourne really negate really well down in the forward half, particularly of the Bulldogs forward half, how they managed to transition so well. And that is an element that Carlton really did bring against Richmond. They were really strong in that avenue, scoring a large amount of scores from defensive sets and getting them score launches. Now, how the Dogs move their ball was really interesting in the forward line. You saw Norton really stand out, and that is a really key pillar for them. They do target their talls, looking to bring the smalls in and around the ground. But it's very interesting. The Dogs have one of the most inside 50 score chains where they really look to move the ball inside 50. So that is where Carlton are going to have to be really switched on. And that's why I really like the back six we went with against the Doggies, against the Tigers for the Doggies, because they're very mobile. They're very adept at looking for the intercept. They're very smart footballers, but they're also impeccable users. I remember last week I said that I thought Sad or Doc would have the two Brownlow votes. I wouldn't be surprised to see them get them, to be honest. Here again, they'll be really integral because if you get into that avenue with the Dogs, they can lock it in. And that is where Melbourne really did a number on them with their ability to transition out of their defensive half. What is really interesting about them as well is that they're not just having the highest percentage of scores in the league. It is literally crazy, their amount. 22 points come from that every game. Was also their ability, Melbourne's, to tackle. Now, last year they were 65% their tackles stuck. The other night they were 51%. And they had to apply pressure and make the Doggies kick. And they did that impeccably well in the second half. You have to close your player down, because the Doggies are one of the best teams under pressure with their ability to get away the handball. So this is going to be a real run-with game. Now, at the time of recording, we've just heard Walsh is playing and Chair is out. Probably a good thing in a way, in the terms of that Walsh's gut running and his ability to apply pressure is exceptional. So it's kind of a like for like. So if we were going into this game thinking Walsh wasn't playing, we've lost Chera, you've kind of got a like for like. And that is a really interesting premise here, because what you find the Doggies did last week against Melbourne, when they started to gain ascendancy, is they moved McRae a bit wider. Now, McRae did start as a wingman in juniors before he became the prolific bowler he is. So this is where you'll be looking at Setterfield and Mr. O'Brien to really do that. Now, I know O'Brien and Setterfield come under a lot of heat at Carlton. I get that. I've seen it. I've given them heat too. If we actually go to the Richmond game, what they did really well in the second half was the ability to stay with players, especially O'Brien. Although he wasn't crash hot on the ball at times and he was a little bit loose, we've got to admit, with some of his disposals. So were they all, really. They all were in the first half, particularly. His ability to stay with players is really integral. And when you look at the Doggies' makeup, that is their outlet ball. They're very proficient at getting the outlet ball. So Carlton have got to really look at that, because the Doggies, they also can transition well. And what they did is particularly in their ascendancy, there was only 1 point they conceded from transition up to the half time. And that is real clever by the Dogs. They can stifle you as well. So this is really going to be a shootout, I think, in that middle of the park. Both of these sides, particularly Carlton this year, and then we look at Doggies traditionally, they get a lot of points from clearances. That's something that's been a huge improvement in Vossi's game. And you've got to make sure that you do this, because what Melbourne did was their ability to retain possession in the forward 50 and not leave without scoring. They were about 42. Carlton were 48. When they really took over, though, they went up to about 58. And that's where Carlton need to be. You need to make sure that you get the scores to put more pressures on, because Melbourne had very similar numbers to what we did when we played them. So it's a very similar game. So really for the Carlton players, they've just got to think, do what you did against Melbourne and you replicate it here is important. Now, over the things that are a bit difficult, one thing that Melbourne dominated, and traditionally teams that do dominate against the Doggies and do get ascendancy, is two things. One, your post-clearance ground ball gets, but two, your contested marks. You've got to be able to clink your marks, because the way that the Doggies play, their pressure is applied from the start of the game till the end. You've got to be able to relieve that pressure. You can't just rely on your ability on the ground. Now, that is what Carlton did at times against Richmond. They really did pack the fall of the ball and did really well. Now, they did win the mark count and they did start to get a bit better, but you really do need your outlet ball, your Charlie Kerner or your Harry, to clunk their marks. And that is where we're looking at the midfield, because their ability to beat Doggies is in your midfield and your ability to intercept, and Carlton had an awful lot of them. Last week as well, Melbourne generated 53 of their points from their ability to create midfield turnover. Carlton have got to do that, but Carlton also, what Melbourne did was when they got that ball, they retained possession. What you find when you look at the midfield interception stats particularly is it can quite often go either way because the game is hotly contested. So what I mean by that is a great example is Carlton at half-time against Port were actually leading midfield intercepts. The problem is they just gave the ball up in the D50 and it became an intercept and a transition goal. And that is where Carlton need to look, because when you can get that ball, you've got them offside. What Dogs are really, really apt at doing is getting numbers back and dealing with that. And although they are traditionally smaller, again, this is a danger game in the terms of if you go into it and think Carlton are taller, Carlton will win the game because of their height, it actually works against you. Look at Port's methods. Look at how Carlton played against Richmond. It wasn't the talls that did the damage down back. It was the smalls that did the damage back. And that is the traditional way. You have to lead your spoil count. You have to lead your mark count. And that is on both ends of the ground. A lot will be expected of Harry to have that kind of game that he did a couple of weeks back in pre-season, where we started to see this new Harry of not taking the mark and bringing it down at the fall of the deck to his Durdens, to his Fishers, and taking the advantage of that. All in all, though, this is a really winnable game for Carlton, and it's not a game that I'm looking at with any element of fear. I'm looking at this game and thinking, it's bob on. They can win this game. And I'm really interested to see how Carlton's set up. They've got to be strong around the contest. They've got massive clearance dominance. They can score from clearances. They were strong in the ground ball gets. All roads lead to Carlton should do well. And then if you look back at history, even when we've been garbage, for some reason these players just match up with them. I think it's going to be a really closely fought game. And I've got a sneaky feeling that if Carlton kick the first two, they win this game at a canter. I'm going with Carlton by 18. I'm really confident in this one. It's going to be a tough ask though. This is a lot harder than the Richmond game. As you know, I was laid back about the Richmond game. There was no way we were losing that. There was no analytics that said to be scared. The Doggies, they are going to be hurt. They are going to be chomping at the bit. No one wants to start 0-2. However, there is the analytical data is pointing that Carlton should not fear them, and they're more than a match for them. I'm really looking forward to this one, though. I'm looking forward to seeing Doc. I think Doc's going to have a huge part to play, and I do think Walsh and Cripps are going to hit the ground running as they're reunited again. And I do think, here's Pom's prediction, 7 goals to come between Charlie and Harry. So let's see how that turns out. Join me for the watch along. I can't wait to see you on Blue Abroad. Have a great week. Go Blues. Let me know in the comments your predictions. Pom out.